War is insane and stupid. 80% of the people killed in wars are civilians. War is immoral, senseless, and illegal by the Nuremberg principles developed by the Nuremberg trials after the Second World War and by the Kellogg-Briand Pact. And there's millions of refugees. And in addition, wars don't work. They make more enemies than we can kill. They create more people who hate us, and they sow the seeds for future wars. Wars are costly in terms of lives lost and in dollars. 180 million people were killed in wars in the last century, and the killing continues unabated. The US is presently bombing 7 primarily Muslim countries and preparing for war with Russia, North Korea, China, Iran, and trillions of dollars down the rat hole of war and preparations for war. I had the opportunity to meet with John Kennedy in 1962 in the White House, and he told us he'd been reading The Guns of August, how before the First World War, everyone was arming to the teeth to try to prevent that war from happening. And this is May of 1962. He said it's scary how similar the situation is now to what it was in 1914. We challenged him to challenge the Russians to a peace race, and his response was, if you folks are serious about that suggestion, you need to go out and build a much more powerful peace movement that are going to encourage and support me to take that leadership. There are effective alternatives to war: negotiation, mediation, supporting nonviolent movements, working for common security rather than national security. Common security meaning security for all of us, not one nation as opposed to others. We need to negotiate, sit down at the negotiation table and look at the legitimate concerns of all countries and all parties involved in a conflict, and then look for common interests and concerns and submit to mediation or go to the International Court of Justice if we can't mediate it or negotiate it ourselves. The institution of war must be abolished. The good news is that people all over the world are discovering the power of nonviolent action and nonviolent means of confronting dictators and governments which do not represent the people. Nonviolent people power movements have overthrown oppressive governments all over the world. India, Philippines, all over Eastern Europe in '89, including Poland, Czechoslovakia, East Germany. In Serbia, Liberia, Chile, South Africa, Tunisia, and most recently in South Korea, where millions of citizens were out in the streets day after day for weeks and even months, and have now forced the warlike president and corrupt president out of power, and have now elected a president who's committed to making peace with North Korea. A great example for the rest of us. It's also good news, I think, that the massive majority of people all over the world want peace and do not want war. But our governments, unfortunately, continue their addiction to wars and military buildup as a means of finding security and resolving conflict. We, the people of the world, need to realize that we are the overwhelming majority of the world's people, and I would guess maybe we're 95% of the world's people, and we must demand that our governments end the institution of war and their addiction to war and put the hundreds of billions of dollars we presently spend on wars and preparations for wars into human and environmental needs, including help make the transition to a renewable energy future so we don't need to fight wars for oil. This could create a better life for every person on the planet. It could be a giant Marshall Plan. And then instead of being at war with much of the world, we could be the most loved nation on earth and much more secure. I wrote a letter to the Washington Post 2 days after September 11th of 2001, in which I said we've spent trillions of dollars trying to get security through the military and intelligence, and it got us zero security on September 11th. Isn't it time that we tried something else? Something similar to what I was just suggesting. Most of you probably know that Erica Chenoweth and Maria Stefan have written the book Why Civil Resistance Works, in which they studied 323 violent and nonviolent movements over the past 110 years, and found that the nonviolent movements are more than twice as likely to be successful as violent movements, and are also much more likely to end up in a democratic society and not revert to dictatorship or civil war. We need to address the Russia-phobia and the Putin phobia in this country. The deep state in the United States is addicted to war and preparations for war, and are preparing for American war with Russia, as we've heard. And the US and NATO troops, tanks and fighter jets, and planes loaded with bombs are on the Russian border. There is a greater chance of nuclear war than any time since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Instead of vilifying the Russians, we need to put ourselves into the shoes of the Russian people, and even of Putin. How would we feel if the Russians had troops and tanks and bomber planes on our borders? Instead of worrying so much what they might have done to try to influence our elections, maybe we should also look at how much we've done to influence their elections and elections of governments all over the world. And as we've heard, something very similar to what we're doing with Russia is happening with North Korea. So there's very real danger of war with North Korea. As you may have heard, North Korea has offered that if we make a peace agreement with North Korea and agree to recognize the existence of that state, they will forego their nuclear developments. Well, that would be much better than starting a nuclear war, from my perspective. Unfortunately, a perpetual state of war has become the norm, with war with many Muslim and Arab countries, preparing for war with Russia and North Korea, ringing China and the US with military bases, preparing for a war with Iran. We, the people, must say no. We will not put up with this madness. Johan Galtung, who started many of the peace studies programs around the world and has worked as a mediator in many conflicts around the world, has predicted the end of the American empire by 2020. That's good news. But whether it's 2020 or 2030 or 2050, the American empire will end, just as all empires have ended. It's just a question of whether it will end by the US fighting one war after another, trying to hold on to our wealth and power and privilege, our empire, or will the American people join the world's people in making the transition from American empire to a much more just sharing of the world's wealth and resources as peaceful as possible? In addition to ending the institution of war, I see this as the greatest challenge before the American people. On February 15th, 2003, probably most of us here joined 15 million people over the world demonstrating to try to stop the war with Iraq before it started. The New York Times called this the world's second superpower, world public opinion. But the problem was that one-day demonstration, or any one-day demonstration, is not going to stop wars. We need sustained nonviolent resistance. People in the streets and blocking arms shipments and blocking war maneuvers day after day after day. So if we want to end war, we need massive nonviolent resistance and non-cooperation with the war machine. An example is Nuremberg actions out at Concord Naval Weapons Station, where many of us blocked trains that were carrying bombs to Central America in the 80s. We blocked every train for 2.5 years. Many across the country are refusing to pay taxes for war. The 50% of our taxes that go to war. And if Trump's budget goes through, it'll be 57% of every tax dollar goes for war. So they need young bodies to go and fight the wars, and they need the money from the rest of us, and they need the silent, stepping aside and letting them fight their wars. Well, we have a say in what we do. There are peaceful alternatives to create security which could work. A global security system, which World Beyond War has written and is on the back table there, lays out what we see as an alternative to war as a means to trying to achieve security. And as I said before, it'd be concerned about common security, not just national security. And it would be committing ourselves to negotiate our problems. World Beyond War has on our website the $2 trillion choice before the world's people. Each year, the world spends $2 trillion for wars and preparations for wars. So we can either continue to put $2 trillion a year into wars and preparations for wars, or we could put that $2 trillion into creating a better life for every person on the planet. We, the people of the world, have that choice, and we must demand that our governments listen to the will of the people. And I encourage people to look at the 10-minute video that's on the top of our website, worldbeyondwar.org. We need to build a broad-based movement of all the groups which could benefit by choosing against militarism and war and for the needs of people and the environment. This includes people concerned about global warming, poverty and inequality, police brutality, patriarchy, racism, homophobia, student debt, concern about the loss of civil rights and civil liberties, terrorism and terrorism threats. We're really need to see ourselves as one movement. And we need to see that our nation's addiction to war is a major cause and contributor to all these problems. I believe that our greatest enemy is people's sense of powerlessness and hopelessness. We need to realize that we do have the power to create change, even to end war. Martin Luther King said 50 or so years ago, the arc of the moral universe bends toward justice. And in a church basement with just 35 people, he said, we have the power in this room, if we mobilize it, to completely change the future course of America. Well, King believed that, and he helped other people believe that too. I think we need to believe that. I've written this book, Waging Peace, Global Adventures of a Lifelong Activist, because I wanted to share my involvement in nonviolent movements and peace and justice making in this country and around the world over the past 60 years, with the hope that these stories will inspire people that we can make a difference, that we can help make history. And just very briefly, one of the stories that I tell in here is when the United States started bombing Hanoi and Haiphong in Christmas time of 1971, a bunch of us just tried to put ourselves in the shoes of the families in Hanoi and Haiphong and what it felt like to them, and decided somehow we have to put our bodies between these bombs and the people in Hanoi and Haiphong. Well, we did a little research and found that there was a Navy base just about an hour and a half from Philadelphia where we were living. And we found some canoes, and with 26 canoes and 52 people, began blocking an armed ship that was taking bombs to Vietnam, the USS Nitro. Well, on the 6th day, we were out there paddling madly to stray right in front of the ship, and 7 sailors jumped off that ship and began swimming toward our people's blockade. Well, those sailors got picked up by the Navy and put in the brig, but they told us later, and this was on evening news and New York Times, et cetera, those 7 sailors told us later that when their ship went through the Panama Canal, all the other Navy ships had also all heard about the USS Nitro and those 7 sailors and gave them the fist of solidarity. And about that time, the resistance by US soldiers to carrying out the orders in that war really intensified. So I like to believe that our courage gave courage to those 7 sailors to do what they believed was right, and their courage gave courage to a whole lot of other American soldiers to stop cooperating with the madness of that war. And if you've seen the film Sir, No Sir, you'll see that a major reason that war stopped was the American soldiers were no longer fighting it. So my hope is that these stories will inspire people, that we can make a difference, that we can help make history and put an end to wars and create a world with peace and justice and a sustainable world for our children and grandchildren and all future generations. I'd just like to end by reading a declaration of peace that over 60,000 people in 153 countries have signed, and over 400 organizations, that you can sign either on our website or there's a clipboard back on the table, or several clipboards actually. It says, "I understand that wars and militarism make us less safe rather than protecting us, that they kill, injure, and traumatize adults, children, and infants, severely damage the natural environment, erode civil liberties, and drain our economies, siphoning resources from life-affirming activities. I commit to engage in and support nonviolent efforts to end all war and preparations for war and to create a sustainable and just peace." So thank you for joining us.